Tuku te wairua ki a rere ki ka taumata, hai arahi a tātou mahi. Me tā tātou whai ka tika ka rātou mā, kia mau kia ita, kia kori ai e karo, kia pūpuri, kia whakamaua, kia tina, hui e tāiki e. Kia ora tēnā.
Kia ora. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming along. For those of you in the future who are listening in, hello to you, future humans. We've got a really cool webinar event today that, well, for some context, I guess Chris and Jason from Leadership Lab, they too are not that long ago certified B Corp. And when they certified, we said, I said, hey, look, we'll get you on our podcast. And so we've literally about an hour ago finished recording their podcast episode. So watch this space for that hitting the airwaves in the near future. And we also said, well, look, do you guys want to do some kind of webinar or infotainment type thing on a topic that you're kind of really good at nailing, that might be of value to what I call, you've got obviously your B Corp, you've got your wannabes, which is the people on the B Corp journey, and then you've got your B Corp curious. So they were like, yes, we'd be very, very keen. So really, that's why we're here today. Chris, over to you. What's going to be hitting the airwaves on this little episode for these amazing humans?
Kia ora everyone, Chris Jansen takuingoa. So my name's Chris, one of the shareholders and directors of Leadership Lab. And as you know, here's the title, Honouring Te Tiriti, Integrating Aotearoa's Values in the New B Corp Framework. So everything about that title is our passion, and it's very topical in Aotearoa, New Zealand this week, isn't it? So you want to pop on to the next one, Jace? So we're going to basically do this in two parts. You can kind of see three things we're going to talk about for about 25 minutes, and then we're going to give you some time in the dreaded breakout rooms, and we'll join you as well just to chew on that. And then we'll come back and have a look at those next two things there and have another breakout and wrap things up within about an hour and a bit. So first thing is me.
I can say quickly, hear you guys introduce yourselves.
Over to you, Jace.
Couldn't find my button. Kia ora tātou. Heuri au no whenua ke, no ingarangi, no airani, no koterana, no Awherika ki te tonga hoki. Ahakoa I whakatipo au ki Kirikiriroa, and noho ana maua ko taku hoa wahine ki Denver, Colorado, I nei. Engari, I enei rā, or I tēnei rā, kei te noho ki Kaiapoi. So, ko Jason Pemberton tōku ingoa. I'm based in Denver. Christchurch is home, but I'm currently sitting in Kaiapoi for a couple of days. Nice to see you all, and I'm with Leadership Lab. I'm the senior consultant with Leadership Lab.
And kia ora, no harana no ingarangi o Kitipuna, no te tahi tōku kāinga nai nei, called Chris takuingoa. So my dad's from Holland, my mum's from England back in the day, and I live in Waitangi, Christchurch. And as I said earlier, I'm part of Leadership Lab. We set that up about 12 years ago down here in response to the earthquakes. And so going to spend 5 minutes just talking a bit about us and our B Corp journey. And well, let's get into that. So what do? We are a leadership consultancy, impact-focused leadership consultancy, Te Tiriti of Waitangi led. So we're very conscious of our place here in Aotearoa. I do work in Asia and Jace does work in the States, but that's under a different entity. So in New Zealand, it's Leadership Lab. And we basically work with leaders in the government sector and in the community sector, and not much in the for-profit sector at the moment, but kind of come from that background. Got a team of about 50 people. You can see about 2/3 of them there, based from sort of Whangarei down to Tahuna, Queenstown. Next slide. Yeah, we're very impact focused, as I said. You can see down there in the bottom right, there's 5 main areas that we've focused on. I guess in the nutshell, we're about an equitable and thriving Aotearoa and all that means. And as you know, it's not a very equitable, thriving place at the moment. Next one. And we do a whole lot of stuff, and I guess there's a wee dashboard for you. But kind of we design leadership programs. We, some things are a week long, some things are a year long, some things we're actually just in year 10 of a program at the moment, working with the whole of Christchurch and all its schools. So a whole range of different things. Next one. And this kind of our logic model. I'll just let you have a quick read of that. Oh, go back, Chase. Yep. Yeah, so yeah, thanks. And next one. And another way of thinking about it, you may have heard of Margaret Wheatley, American poet, but we really love this. And we see ourselves as creating islands of sanity. And I'm not sure if you can relate to that, but the idea that in the old destructive raging sea, system change is all about thinking about how to approach changes, and our approach is definitely creating exceptions and islands of sanity and then growing those islands, kind of like a viral approach. Next one. B Corp. I guess we've always been purpose driven. We set up, I was at the University of Canterbury, had two other directors at the time. We kind of did a startup around the kitchen table, as some of you may relate to, left the academic world and decided to get into consulting. It was because of the earthquakes. We wanted to contribute here in Christchurch. And it's kind of gone in leaps and bounds from there. I heard about B Corp probably about 3 years before actually engaged with it. And we decided to get into it because as a startup that had grown to like 50 people, we kind of had a lag in our systems, so we were doing a lot of cool stuff, but we didn't necessarily have the best way to document that, articulate that, and all the back end. So we kind of used B Corp as a bit of a audit, really. And we wanted to be asked lots of hard questions. And it was really useful for that. We probably didn't really need it for credibility, but who knows, that might be a real possibility in the future. But we also wanted to be able to say, in New Zealand, as you know, you're either a sort of a charitable or you're a for-profit business, and we're neither. So we're kind of a wee bit in the middle. And so that B Corp was quite appealing for that. The journey of doing that has been ups and downs. We got accredited eventually. We've been accredited for a couple of years, and we're about to start on the next step, which is the new standards, which is what we're here to talk about today. And you might be in a similar place. Over to you, Jace.
I keep losing the controls here. I love Zoom. So really what we thought we'd do is just essentially give a high-level overview of what is coming in the new standards, like what are the major changes. I'll note that the slides I'm going to share is all from B Lab. It's all the B Lab stuff, and it's all still currently technically draft. So there will be minor tweaks and changes, but we're into the second round of revisions and they're finalizing it now, and it's expected to be released next year. And then we're going to essentially go, this is the standards, a quick overview of Te Tiriti and our histories here in New Zealand, and then look at how they weave together. So really the main reason why the standards are changing is essentially that first circle on the left. They wanted to get B Corp focusing on the biggest social, environmental, and governance issues in the world. They have learned a lot over this journey and gone, actually, we can clarify the most important actions and the most useful things that we're trying to get more organizations involved with. And then when they started looking at that stuff, you realize a lot of organizations, some of you may have experienced this yourselves, you're going through the B Corp accreditation and you have to collect a lot of information, but then you're also trying to get another accreditation, a fair trade or a living standards or anything like that. So you end up having to collect a lot of information. So B Corp is explicitly trying to be interoperable with all of these other standards and requirements around the world, which is really cool. And ultimately, it's about that right-hand thing, clarifying what it means to be a B Corp. The slides the presentation that these slides are drawn from was in Australia in February this year. And the guy from B Lab essentially said, and as it currently stands, the B Corp framework kind of celebrates companies for doing good, but they don't necessarily have to be good to be a B Corp. Whereas moving forward, they want the identity of the B Corp to be about companies that are doing good and being good. And so it's quite a philosophical shift from this sort of notion of getting enough points. You'll all recognize this. You have to get enough points to get across the line. And the new performance requirements is really saying, well, there are 9 areas of impact and there are minimum standards across all of these areas. And if you don't pass those, then you're not going to be a B Corp. So it's quite a step up in terms of the what I would think of as being the efficacy of the measurement of whether the thing is doing good. And that was a very explicit approach from B Corp. So these are currently draft things. If we just look at the left-hand side, this is one of the ways that they're proposing sort of measuring the standards. It's this idea of you either meet it or don't meet it, or you exceed it, and you have to meet all of the areas to get a B Corp. And then the impact business models, which some of you on the call may have, Leadership Lab, we had 4 of them. Those are kind of moving into like a brownie badge over and above. So on the right-hand side are a couple of the draft examples of how they might start to represent that, where you can say, okay, I've got the brownie badge for this impact model, and then you can increase the value of that brownie badge from a bronze to a silver to a gold or something like that. So that's kind of the vague shape that it's taking. So looking at the exact same thing a slightly different way, they've framed it like this. You'll probably remember from your own assessment process, there's some foundational stuff. You had to answer some kind of eligibility questions. Those have gotten a bit more robust and a bit more comprehensive. And then if you make it, once you've made it through those, then you get into the performance requirements where you have to meet the minimum standards on all 9 areas. So these 9 areas is really what the work is. And when we think about the realities of some of this stuff, if we just pick one of them, human rights, the conversation about human rights in New Zealand is very different than the conversation about human rights in other areas of the world. And so B Corp is starting to really drive across all of these 9 impact areas, this idea of local contextualization and contextualization within the context of your company as well, because a company of 5 people is very different than a company of 25,000 people. And so the contextualization is starting to be around both revenue and or number of workers, whichever is largest, then you shift into a different band, and different bands have different requirements across those 9 impact areas. And then also the contextualization into your local country is becoming really, really driven and important. So when we went through the B Impact assessment in 2022, there was one reference to indigeneity in the whole thing, which as a Te Tiriti based organization, we were a little bit confronted by. Moving forward, I haven't actually been able to count the full number of times indigeneity is referenced, because it's the recognition of context is a lot more important. And as you're going through the new standards, you are going to be required to do a lot of thinking and contextualization for yourself. And that's what we're here to do, is we're trying to help you do that contextualization and fast track that thinking. So these are the impact areas. The next slide has got some the full descriptions of each of them. We're going to, when we get into the breakout rooms, we're going to share the slides with you so you can refer back to these if you like. But that's kind of a high-level overview of the new standards and where it's heading. Now I'll throw back to Chris to talk about Te Tiriti.
Yeah, so I guess when we did the original B Corp journey, you know, we got partway through it and we had a few issues with it, and Jason's kind of hinted at those, and we've talked quite a lot about them in the podcast. But it was kind of things around tokenism, really, and being authentically grounded in context is really important to us as a company here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. You know, we're not a Sydney-based company or Singapore or wherever else, and that wasn't really acknowledged in B Corp. So we actually nearly ditched the process partway through. Tim will remember our kind of crisis there, and we nearly gave it all away. But we did decide to go with it, knowing, and one of the reasons we did is we knew these new standards were coming. So just gonna speak for 5 minutes about our Aotearoa context. Now, if you're aware of New Zealand's context and Aotearoa's context, this will be old news, but we wanted to just kind of pitch this little bit at if someone who's thinking, I don't actually know what you mean by that. So tough job for me trying to explain our history in 4 minutes, but I'll give it a go. For me, there was a lot of gaps in my knowledge, and I'll show you that in a moment. And I think the last 3 or 4 years as a Pākehā European Kiwi, it was a bit horrifying to start discovering things that I should have been taught when I was younger, but I only really started discovering when I was 50. So here's a few tiny little things. One is that in 1835, there was He Whakaputanga, which is New Zealand or Aotearoa declaring itself as an independent nation. You know, and that was really important. One of the things that was happening was Māori were trading all around the world in waka and getting arrested. One case in Sydney Harbour because they had no flag, because it was assumed that they were pirates. So there's a bunch of different reasons, but in 1835, this is kind of really important. These are the kind of things you don't hear on the news, but anyway, it did happen. Go forward 5 years. On the basis of that, go forward 2, please, Jace. On the basis of that, we're all aware of just the next one. Yep, Te Tiriti o Waitangi in 1840. I actually had a bit of a LinkedIn battle with a person commenting on a post of mine this morning around this. But my understanding of this is the rangatira, who were the chiefs of all the hapu or the families that made up iwi, we now call iwi, basically worked with some of the European settlers to say, let's decide how to live well together. And the really important thing that shocked me is that at that time when this happened, there was about 150 to 200,000 Māori here and only about 2,000 Europeans. And if you go to the next slide, Jace, the reason why that's shocking to me is that if you've been brought up in a primary school in New Zealand, and if you're, say, in your 50s, which you're probably a bit younger than that, you may remember this. This was in a school journal. I Googled it about a few years ago and I found it and I thought, this is quite confronting because this picture is what I was told at primary school happened in 1840. Unfortunately, the problem with that picture is it's actually all fabricated. It didn't actually happen at all. I think there's a transition there, Jace. It's basically a myth because if you look at the power dynamics in the picture, it's actually just written from one person's perspective. The actual reality was quite different than that if you think about the numbers and if you think about the intentions of the rangatira. Now, all of what I'm saying here might be triggering to you, or it might be old news. I don't really know. But I guess what we're saying is that the context of Aotearoa here is critical to how we run our business. And so B Corp's beginning to acknowledge that, which we're really pleased about. Yeah. I think that's, just one more slide maybe. Again, oversimplistic way we think about things at Leadership Lab is, I guess Aotearoa to New Zealand to Aotearoa represents the kind of shift we've seen from kind of pre-contact through to early settlers, through to Te Tiriti, which is kind of at the end of the Aotearoa. New Zealand section is kind of like the last 180 years, and there's plenty of yucky things about that. And the Aotearoa part is the transition we've been in for probably about 2 decades now in terms of reconnecting with our roots really into Te Tiriti. Now, if you're a Netflix geek, like I am, you kind of understand that from a season 1, season 2, season 3 perspective. We're kind of to me, we're sort of at the S of season 3, just wondering where this is going to go. And it's on a bit of a knife edge, as we saw with the hikoi on Tuesday. So, one more slide, Jace. I'm very aware that I've talked about a very important thing in a short time, which is always risky. But where we, and Jason and I and our company stand is that we see that we have an active role in addressing the articles of Te Tiriti, which the rangatira set up as the way that we could actually live together. And you can see there's some big words in there, but re-indigenizing and decolonizing is really the name of the game for us. Now, Jace, next slide. So, very aware that we've mic dropped several massive things on you. And so what we thought we'd do is just have some time to think about that. So thinking about the context of Aotearoa, I'm assuming you're in Aotearoa, but you may be coming in from another country. In that case, it'll be a different context, Australia, Singapore, the States. The question is, in what ways do the new B Corp impact areas that Jace talked about connect with Te Tiriti or Waitangi context that I talked about? Right. Now, Jace is going to pop up that slide with the 9 impact areas or the new standards. And really, we're just saying, where do you think, as you get into this and you start going through the questions, where do you see the relevance and connection between those things? Okay. So it's going to be about 4 people in a breakout. If we could ask you just to introduce yourselves and then go for it with that question. Connections between the new B Corp standards and our context in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Just before we disappear into the rooms, Chris, do you want to drop in the link to the PDF of these slides?
Yep.
So you can click on it and jump down to it. It's about slide 20, and you'll be able to see these impact areas if you want to refer to them.
Yep.
And also if you're wanting to do a bit of Te Tiriti learning, there's some further links in there that you might want to follow through.
Cool. And we'll give you a bit of a 1-minute heads up and bring you back into the room in about 9-10 minutes.
So we got, presuming everyone's done a breakout room, and you all know how those work. There'll be a little button pop up in a minute. You go and join the room. There's about between 3 or 4 of you in a breakout room. And when I close the rooms, it will give you a 60-second countdown. So don't leave the room when the little countdown pops up. You'll just automatically be brought back in. Cool. We'll see you in about 10 minutes. Plus 1. Look at that. It's all kind of worked. How cool is that?
Crikey. Like all breakouts, that was way too short for us.
It's always the way. Always.
Yeah.
But hey, That's how it rolls.
We're actually going to be using the same breakouts again after this next session, so you can continue the conversation, which is great. Shall I rip into it, Tim?
Yep.
Yep, Jace, you want to pop us up? So I guess Leadership Lab is just like you, just thinking about how we're going to approach this. I think we're about 18 months away from reaccreditation, and one thing we're not too sure is what's the time period? Will there be a honeymoon period or grandparenting period, and at what point do we have to engage with this? But I guess this next section is for us to share kind of the thinking that we're doing at the moment in terms of how we might approach this, and if it's useful to you, I guess the offer is come along on the journey with us. We're learning, happy to share. So you'll look at, if you go to the next slide there, Jace, out of the 9 standards, this one, number 4, which they call JEDI, is something that we don't really talk about in New Zealand. The acronym JEDI, it's an American term. They also use DEIJ. It's the same thing, just the other way around. But the idea of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion is a kind of a common language. It's used like in Asia a lot with companies with an American influence. I guess our strategy here is thinking about all 9 standards. Our approach is we're going to strategically go for number 4 first, and then do the work around JEDI, and then use that thinking and work to then peel into the other standards, because we feel like this is probably the most significant one from a context perspective. And so Jason, in a moment, will share kind of a bit of a process we're going to work our way through. But if you think about JEDI, and I was obviously talking about Te Tiriti of Waitangi before, the really important thing for us, because we aim for equity in our company, but when we're talking about that, we're talking about all forms of discrimination, not just ethnicity. We're also talking about gender. We're talking about sexuality. We're talking about ability and disability. We're talking about ageism, all those kind of things. And so, and a way of conceptualizing it too in New Zealand is to see, we sort of see Te Tiriti of Waitangi as the foundation within which a multicultural society can thrive. And so that means that, like in our company, we have a strong rainbow contingent in our staff, and it's about equity for them. Pākehā person who's from the rainbow community also experiences a hell of a lot of discrimination sometimes. We have 2 trans males, and that's real shit for them a lot of the time. And so how do we actually really proactively lean into this JEDI concept, but from an Aotearoa perspective, if that makes sense.
And can I just add one thing, Chris, taking a slight step back, is, when we looked really deeply into these 9 new impact areas and the actual questions, and thinking about it from a Te Tiriti perspective, Te Tiriti kind of connects into all of these impact areas in slightly different ways. And so what Chris is saying here is that if we want to be getting the front foot on the new standards, and we care about the context that we're in, then a really logical and strategic way to approach this is start at number 4 and do a bunch of thinking and work around that, because then that creates the conditions for all of the other 8 impact areas to start to be a bit easier to work through. So I just wanted to explicitly draw that link. Yeah.
And just to add back to, we spoke about this in our breakout room, that the area of Te Tiriti Waitangi is such a political thing at the moment that sometimes the response is, shit, I don't want to stuff this up, so I'll just keep my mouth shut and I'll just try and let someone else talk about it. And I guess I've definitely felt that over my career many times. They call it Pākehā paralysis, that's a valid feeling, especially when you've got sort of what's going on with the government at the moment. But despite that, it's actually it's a very it's a brave but also very rewarding journey to go on. And so if you are feeling like, oh God, this is a bit scary, feel that feeling, but just lean into it, because we really need to address it and not just wait for someone else to solve this one. So hand on to you, Jace.
Yeah, cool. Because the stepping into the process or leaning in, the being brave thing, that's really what we're talking about, is practically speaking, what can that look like, and how can the B Corp framework provide some scaffolding to enable you to do that?
Yeah.
So we've got this kind of proposed process that we're going to be working through as Leadership Lab. And it's sort of just part of what we do anyway. And like Chris said, it's really an invitation for anyone to come with us. But when you look at the actual standards, drilling into the JEDI one, there are two requirements. The first one is really about data collection relative to your people. And depending on the size of the company, smaller companies essentially are exempt. And then the larger you get, the kind of more requirements there are about data collection and disaggregating data based on identifiable factors and that sort of stuff. That's kind of like pretty administrative. JEDI 2 is actually where the rubber hits the road. So there are a list of 23 actions, and every company is going to be required to take action on a certain number of them, depending on their size and scale and all those sorts of things. And you actually get to choose what those actions are. Now, they've listed them A through W, and the order that they're in doesn't really make any sense. So don't look at them as a 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. That's not the way to do it. We spent a bit of time thinking about them, and we've kind of broken them into these 5 sort of categories. These are just some examples that I've pulled out so you can get a sense of what they are. I'll give you a moment to cast your eyes down this list. So you can see engaging, something like 2S here, company engaging in collective action at a policy, industry, or business and community level. That's just of a different nature to making your website accessible, which is of a different nature than reviewing and updating your policies using JEDI principles. So we kind of see there's these 5 different kind of types of action that you could take. There's some sort of foundational stuff, which is about getting your thinking straight and figuring out where you're at. And then there's some externally facing stuff. There's some stuff that's about your industry or sector, some stuff that's internal to your workforce. And then there's some really advanced things, which are more the impact business models. And you could kind of approach them from anywhere, but pragmatically, it sort of makes sense to start with some foundational stuff, maybe some of the external facing stuff, depending on your context, maybe some of the industry stuff, depending on your context. But really, you have to have some of these things in place before you can really meaningfully engage in any conversations with your workforce. If you don't realize that you don't know how to talk to people of diverse backgrounds, and it turns out you've got a really diverse workforce, you kind of want to start with figuring out how to engage with diverse communities. And then after that, you can layer on some of the more advanced stuff. That's all good and fine, putting up some ugly pictures and stuff like that. But let's look at it another way. The reality of doing JEDI work while engaging with Te Tiriti while doing diversity work is there's this kind of 4 steps. You really have to start by looking inwards and critically reflecting on what's actually going on, what am I aware of, what am I not aware of. This is where we've seen in New Zealand a lot over the last 5 years, a lot of companies starting to bring Te Tiriti workshops, Te Tiriti training in-house because they've recognized, hey, a lot of us don't even know our own history because up until a few years ago, it wasn't required that we learned it at school. And as Chris was talking about before, a lot of us actually learned stuff at school that was made up by one side, which was not true. And so we kind of need to look back and go, right, what are the foundations that we're standing on in terms of our understanding, and how much of those foundations is valid and how much needs to be debunked and removed from our psyche before we then start to talk about our opinions on things. So you always start with that inwards looking, and inevitably you learn something about yourself, or you have to learn something else to replace some foundational knowledge that we're missing, or any combination thereof. And then once you kind of are looking at reality with clear eyes, then you can start to think about what you might do. And then once you've started to do some stuff and you're figuring some things out, that's when you start to turn around and say, hey, we're doing some stuff because we've figured some things out, and start to commit publicly to some things and start improving. So you can kind of see there's this linearity that makes sense to work through, which does 2 things. One, it makes it way, way easier to engage with, because you're not saying, we're here to enact Te Tiriti. You're saying, okay, we're just here to see if we even understand what Te Tiriti is. That's a very low risk place to start for anyone. And then the second thing is you're actually starting to layer up meaningful change and meaningful progress in a way that isn't unintentionally doing other damage. There's a really common approach, which was really common sort of 10 years ago. It's becoming less and less common as, we want to learn about Te Tiriti. Let's reach out to a local marae and see if they'll come and help us. That's called cultural burden. asking an oppressed people to tell you about the oppression. It's just horrific if you think about the realities of some of that. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent. This linear process is nice to think about, but more practically speaking, it ends up looking a bit more like this. We look inwards and we learn some stuff, and then based on what we've learned, we kind of loop back and look inwards again, and then learn some more and loop back, and then we start to do something, we've learned some more, and we loop back and look inwards. And by the time you get up to near this top right, there's actually a whole lot of really meaningful work that's been done within your organization internally, and your people have been on a whole interesting journey, and you've met all the standards to do the B Corp Jedi section. So as
just a quick comment there, Jace.
Yeah.
The other temptation we had, which I'm glad we didn't do, is to go and do something publicly first.
Yeah.
You change your website, add a couple of kia oras and, whatever. And that's brownwashing is as bad as greenwashing, and so thankfully someone warned us off that straight away. And we eventually we committed to not changing anything at all on our website until we'd had about 2 years worth of conversations around the other steps, because we wanted to say, when we do eventually tell people about this, we want to be able to scratch it and see that it's real, not just surface.
Yeah. Totally.
I'll just jump in as well and say, that is a model for B Corp purpose, impact, full stop. It's like,
totally.
Actually, what are we doing? Who are we? And that for me is why the B Corp is a great first step. Is like, how are we doing stuff like against the global framework? Are we doing any good right now? Go through and it's something that you often hear people go, going through the process, we had no idea that was a thing, but now we know that that's a thing. We're going to learn about it, and we're going to work out, can we affect any change there? Can we do? Then you go and test it. Yeah. So I think this is a model for any kind of impact improvement that you're trying to make.
Yep, cool. 100%. And that's kind of fairly explicit. It's like, if you want to do the B Corp stuff well in general, this is what it looks like. And this just happens to be the Jedi section, but it really does apply for the whole process. That's spot on, Tim. Love it. So practically speaking, I've got these 4 steps: look inwards, learn something, do something. What might that actually look like when we look at the actual Jedi questions, the actual standards? It could be something like this. Firstly, we carry out an equity audit. If you don't know what that is, hit us up afterwards and we can talk about that. Based on that, you go, okay, turns out we need to learn something. And then once we've learned something, we're going to start to do something. Now that we're doing that, we're going to commit publicly to it. So for a company with sort of 50 to 100 staff, you're probably looking at having to do 4 of these things, and you could literally do these 4 things. I'm not saying write down these numbers and go do these things, but I'm saying it can be as simple as stacking together some things like this within this framework. So we're going to head out to the next breakout, and I encourage you to open up the slides again, jump down to these slides here and have a bit of a look and reflect on these questions.
I'll put them in the chat, Jace.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Chris. Because the reality is doing this stuff is just about creating a context where your people want to show up and work, regardless of who those people are. So what will your company struggle with? Where are you at? Have a bit of a chat, and we'll see you in 10 minutes.
I shall open up the rooms.
Thanks, Tim.
Look at that. And you're all back in the room.
All right.
It all works.
Wonderful. Welcome back. And what we're going to do now is just ask you if you'd like to open the chat and just throw in a sentence of what's going through your mind. Like what was something that came out of the breakout room conversation that you're curious about or inspired by or concerned by? We're just going to bomb it in there. So we're not going to open up the mic and have a discussion. We haven't got time for that. But yeah, just throw some thoughts in there, and we'll just watch those pop through, and I'll do the same. Ants and I wrote almost the exact same thing. Jason, data collection, storytelling. Yeah. Atonia. Yep. Learn more about Te Tiriti. And Becky. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, cool. Amanda's sounding pretty positive, which is great. Excited. And Shayna. Okay. Cool. Anybody else? Nice. Yeah, awesome, Jay. Nice one. So just as you're working away on that there, we're just going to share one more slide in a moment, just of some of the things that we're working on, and I guess a bit of an offer if you're interested. And then I think we'll move to close with karakia soon after that, and then we might just stay in the room, Tim, for anybody who wants to stick around and chat, but if others want to go off and have a afternoon tea, it's cool as well. So yeah, I mean, as Jay and I have said, we're on this journey. We're not experts here. We are excited about these new standards, but we haven't done it yet, and we're preparing. But in the bigger picture of things, this is kind of what we do in our work. We're an equity-focused company. We train and grow leaders for equity. So that's kind of our gig. And there's a whole bunch of things. If you're interested, you've obviously got the slides here. Later, if you're interested, have a look at our website. There's a section on resources which says watch, listen, and read. So depending on your preference, like I'm more of a watch, I guess, but there's a lot of podcasts there and case studies. In particular, there's the podcast, which I'll share in a moment, but there's also Tim's podcast, where you've got all of the series of what he's done, plus the chat we had this morning about our experience at the B Corp. We're also doing some face-to-face learning opportunities. We run all sorts of different things, from like 1 hour to 1 day to 2 1-days to even a year long. And I guess the third offer is more than happy to work with anyone as an individual or their company. And that might be anything from a Zoom chat once off through to like we can walk together in a bit of an ongoing process and even come and work with you. Next slide is just probably the low-hanging fruit. We mentioned this earlier. If you go on Spotify and look up this Becoming Tangata Tiriti or Roto Conversations, two of our Pākehā team decided to create a podcast from a Pākehā perspective on Te Tiriti or Tangata Tiriti, that kind of role in the partnership of Te Tiriti. And so the 6 1-hour episodes, really good for a road trip or a few gym workouts. These came out in January and about 10,000 people have listened. So that's cool. It's obviously striking a chord. But the purpose of this is to fill in some of the gaps that we were purposely not taught at school, unfortunately, because that's actually what happened. Next one. Yeah, and there's some face-to-face things as well. And if you want to have a look at the leadershiplab.co.nz website, there's a bunch of stuff there, but probably the best thing to do is go down the bottom and sign up to the Pānui or newsletter. And once a month, we post out the opportunities, particularly the things for next year that are coming up. Over to you, Jace.
Cool. Well, thank you all very much for being here. Like Chris said, we're happy to stick around for a little bit of time afterwards, but we want to respect your time. So we will close with a karakia, and then that's the chance for anyone to pop off. Before I close up, Tim, is there anything you wanted to drop in and say?
Yeah, just, thanks, team, for being willing to come and talk and share your knowledge. I'm just thinking, so normally the queue to get the podcast turned around is we've got quite a few episodes to drop. But what I'll do is I'll get our episode loaded like at the front of the queue, and then we'll send it to everyone who registered for today ahead of time, so you get like a free little bonus cheeky podcast episode to add to the to the Leadership Lab one. So
awesome. Yeah. Thank you. Yep.
That's awesome. Kia ora, Tim. What a great idea. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. Have on here karakia whakamutuka. Quick note, just for anyone who hasn't been exposed much to te reo, or maybe you're on a bit of a journey and haven't been exposed to the idea of different meta, different dialects. So this is a karakia in the meta o Kaitahu. So Ngaitahu, kaitahu, you might sometimes hear that. So the K sound is a thing that's being brought back for the kaitahu region. And so this is from Kotahi Mano Kaika, which is 1,000 homes. It's the real movement for ngaitahu, kaitahu. So feel free to speak along with me. Otherwise, wonderful to see you all and look forward to being part of a movement together. Hei a koe nei o homa. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia te uru tapunui, kia wātea, kia mama, te kākau, te tinana, te wairui i te arataka tū, koia rā e roko, whakeiri ake ki ruka, tūturu whakamaua kia tina, tina, hui e, tai ki e.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Nice work, team.